Imagine pulling into your own driveway after work, only to have your neighbor storm across the street, scream that you stole your own car, and call the police. Minutes later, you're surrounded by flashing lights and raised voices, fighting to prove the obvious truth. Hands up. Step away from the vehicle! Terrence Braxton froze, his car halfway inside his garage, headlights still glowing against the white paint of his two-story house. A minute ago, he had been thinking about dinner, leftover barbecue ribs he'd been looking forward to all day. But now 4 police cruisers blocked the end of his driveway, officers standing behind open doors with their hands hovering over their holsters. He blinked, disoriented. His first thought was not even fear, but confusion. How could this be happening in front of his own home, his own garage, his own car? But the answer came in the form of a sharp, screeching voice cutting across the cul-de-sac. There he is. That's him. That's the man who stole my car. Lorraine Pritchard, his neighbor across the street, stood in her yard waving her arms like she was flagging down an airplane. Terrence had barely pulled in before she stormed over, pointing at his silver Infiniti like it was some trophy she had lost at an auction. That's my car. I just bought it this week, she screamed, phone clutched in one hand, still connected to 911 dispatch. Terrence shook his head slowly, his mouth open in disbelief. This is my car, Lorraine. What are you talking about? She didn't hear him, or maybe she didn't care. Her voice rose higher, angrier, dripping with authority she didn't actually have. He broke into my garage. He's a criminal! Arrest him. Terrence glanced toward his front door. His 14-year-old daughter, Simone, had stepped outside, her phone already recording, her eyes darting between the officers and her father, wide and trembling. Dad, she whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear. It's okay, baby, he said softly, raising his hands just enough to show the police he wasn't a threat. He wasn't even holding his car keys anymore. They dangled in the ignition, the engine still running. Just keep recording. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. The flashing lights reflected off the garage walls. The entire cul-de-sac had gone silent. Blinds shifting, curtains pulling back, neighbors peeking out like it was their evening entertainment. Terrence forced himself to breathe. His chest was tight, his pulse pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. This wasn't just an argument with a neighbor anymore. This was now a scene where one wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, could spiral into something irreversible. Sir, one of the officers shouted.
Step away from the vehicle.
Hands visible at all times. Terrence obeyed, slowly stepping backward from the garage. His shoes scraped against the driveway, the sound strangely loud in the tense silence. Look at him. Look at him. Lorraine hollered, pointing like she was calling out a suspect in a lineup. That's my car. I just paid cash for it. Terrence couldn't hold back anymore. His voice cracked as he shouted back across the driveway. You're out of your mind. I've had this car for years. You see that license plate? That's mine. My name is on it, my registration, my insurance, everything. Simone moved closer to him, her phone camera steady despite her shaking hands. Dad, they're aiming at you, she whispered again. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He knew that if he broke eye contact with the officers now, it could be seen as defiance. So he kept his hands raised and his body still, speaking only when necessary. My wallet is in my pocket, he said clearly, his voice carrying in the night air. I can show you my license and registration. This is my property. This is my car. I live here. You can check. But Lorraine's voice didn't stop. It cut through every word like broken glass. Don't believe him. He doesn't live here. He moved in recently. I don't care what paper he pulls out, that's my Infiniti. I bought it from CarMax on Monday. Her words dripped with certainty, like she could bend reality just by saying it enough times. Terrence finally turned his head toward her, his face twisting in disbelief and something deeper. Humiliation. Lorraine, my daughter, has grown up in this house. I've been in this neighborhood for 9 years. You've waved at me. You've seen me park this car in this garage every single day. You're lying. But Lorraine only raised her phone higher and spoke louder into the receiver. He's threatening me now. He's yelling. Please hurry. The officers looked from Lorraine to Terrence, their hands still twitching near their holsters, the decision hanging in the air like a storm cloud about to break. And that's when Simone's voice, small but firm, cut through the noise. My dad didn't steal anything, she said, her camera still recording. You're making this up and everyone watching knows it. For the first time that night, Lorraine's expression faltered. But the officers weren't convinced yet, and the night was only just beginning. He's been using since before I was even in middle school. Lorraine waved dismissively at her. Sweetheart, you don't understand how the world works. He's fooling you too. Terrence's chest tightened at her words. He stepped forward slightly, enough to make his voice carry, but not enough to alarm the officers. Don't you dare patronize my daughter. She's smarter than this entire circus you've created tonight, and she knows the truth because she's lived it. One of the younger officers cleared his throat, holding up the registration like it was the final word. Ma'am, unless you can produce paperwork showing you own this specific vehicle, matching VIN, matching plate, your claim doesn't hold up. Lorraine's face twisted, her lips trembling with fury. I don't need to show you anything. My word should be enough. The older officer shook his head firmly. That's not how this works. The documents here are valid. Until you provide evidence Mr. Braxton is the lawful owner. The neighbors began murmuring louder now. A couple whispered to each other on the porch across the street. Someone muttered, "This is embarrassing." Another said, "She's making a fool of herself," but Lorraine only doubled down. You're all blind. You're all being played. You'll regret ignoring me when the truth comes out. Terrence finally let his frustration spill out, his voice sharp but steady. The only one playing anyone here is you, Lorraine. You've dragged the police into this, terrified my daughter, humiliated me in front of half the block, all because you couldn't handle seeing me drive a car you wanted. Admit it, that's all this is. You saw me in something nice and decided it couldn't belong to me. Lorraine's eyes flickered just for a moment like she'd been exposed, but then her face hardened again and she lifted her chin. That's not true. I told you I bought this car. You'll see when I get my papers. The officer stopped her before she could move. Ma'am, you're not leaving the scene. If you can provide paperwork later, do so at the station. But for tonight, this matter is closed. Her mouth dropped open. Closed? You're letting him get away with it? Terrence let out a short, bitter laugh. Get away with what? Living in my house? Parking in my garage? Being who I am? Simone lowered the phone just enough to wipe her cheek with her sleeve, her voice wavering as she spoke. Dad, please, can we just go inside? He looked at her, his face softening. In a minute, sweetheart. Almost done. Then he turned back to the officers, his voice calm but edged with exhaustion. Are we finished here? Or is she going to keep yelling all night while I stand out here proving who I am over and over again? The officers hesitated, their authority fraying under Lorraine's persistence. She still shouted, still demanded, still insisted. Her cries filled the cul-de-sac, bouncing off houses and rattling the air. Terrence stood there, a man forced to defend the obvious truth, while Lorraine clung to her accusation like it was her last shred of power. But the night wasn't ready to quiet down yet, because her refusal to let go would ripple straight into the heart of his family. The officers had their proof. The registration matched, the VIN matched. Dispatch had confirmed everything. By all logic, the confrontation should have ended right there, but Terrence could feel it in his bones. Lorraine wasn't going to let go. And worse, Simone was watching it all play out in real time. Her phone in one hand, her childhood innocence slipping through the other. She stood on the driveway steps, her face pale under the flashing patrol lights. Her voice cracked as she whispered again, "Dad, can we please go inside? Please." Terrence's eyes met hers for a moment and he saw what he'd been trying to protect all along. Fear. Real fear. Not the kind that comes from a scary movie or a nightmare, but the kind that digs in deep because you realize the world can turn against you in an instant. Stay strong, baby girl, he said softly, enough for her camera mic to pick it up. I need you to keep recording. You're braver than you think. But Lorraine's shrill voice drowned him out. She's just a child. She doesn't know what she's filming. This is all staged. He told her to do this. Look at him using his daughter as part of the scam. Pathetic. That was enough to make Simone's trembling stop. She lifted the phone higher, her voice sharp and steady. No, don't talk about my dad like that. Don't you dare. The neighbors watching from their porches seemed to stir at that. A few even shifted uncomfortably as if realizing the absurdity of the spectacle. But the officers still looked caught between protocol and the chaos unfolding. Terrence took a breath, then spoke directly to the police. You've confirmed the paperwork. You've confirmed the records. So why am I still standing here like a suspect in front of my daughter? Why am I still being treated like I don't belong in my own driveway? The younger officer avoided his eyes, glancing instead toward Lorraine, who had now planted herself firmly in the middle of the cul-de-sac, arms crossed like a barricade. Because, she snapped before the officer could respond. I'm telling you the truth. I wouldn't make this up. He's lying to everyone and you're too scared to admit it. Simone's voice wavered as she stepped forward. You're scaring me. Do you even care about that? You're screaming at my dad when he hasn't done anything. You're making him stand here like he's a criminal, and for what? For a car that isn't even yours? The silence that followed was heavy. The officers shifted, uneasy. Lorraine scoffed, rolling her eyes. She's dramatic, just like him. Always playing the victim. Terrence clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay composed. Enough, Lorraine. You've made your accusation. The facts don't back you up. And now you're dragging my child through this. Look at her, look at the fear you've caused. What kind of person does that? Lorraine didn't answer, but her jaw tightened, her chest heaving with fury she couldn't put into words. The officer holding the paperwork finally stepped forward, his tone sharper now. Ma'am, we've checked everything. The car belongs to Mr. Braxton. There's no basis for further accusation tonight. If you believe otherwise, file a report and provide your documentation. But this stops here. Lorraine's face twisted, her voice shrill. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this. Simone lowered her phone slightly, her breathing ragged. She looked up at her father, eyes glassy with unshed tears. Dad, why do they believe her? Why don't they just stop her? Terrence crouched down slowly, ignoring the officers and Lorraine for a moment, focusing only on his daughter. Sometimes people scream louder than the truth, and sometimes the people who should know better let themselves listen. But you know the truth, and that's what matters tonight. Simone blinked, her lips trembling. I don't want you to get hurt. I won't, he said firmly, placing a hand over his chest. Not while you're watching. Not while I have to be strong for you. The officers, caught in the middle of father and daughter, shifted uneasily again. One muttered something about wrapping this up. But Lorraine's voice came back like a whip. You think this is over? You think you get to walk away like nothing happened? No, I'll call the HOA board. I'll call the city. I'll make sure everyone knows what you're doing. You don't belong here, and I'll prove it. Simone turned toward her, her phone still recording. Everyone already knows what you're doing, and they're watching you embarrass yourself. For the first time, Lorraine faltered. Her face twitched. Her eyes darted toward the gathering neighbors. The murmurs grew louder, some shaking their heads, others muttering words like enough already and let it go. Terrence rose back to his feet, his voice calm but cold. You can scream all night, Lorraine, but the truth is already out there and it's not going anywhere. But even as the officers prepared to close the scene, the damage was already done, especially to Simone, who would carry the weight of this night far longer than anyone realized. The police radios had gone quiet. The paperwork had confirmed the truth, but the tension still lingered over the street like fog that refused to lift. Terrence could feel the weight of every set of eyes watching. Curtains pulled back, phone cameras glinting in the dark, whispers bleeding across manicured lawns. Lorraine wasn't backing down, and neither was he. What's at stake, Lorraine? Your pride? Your reputation? You called the cops on your neighbor because you couldn't accept the truth. That's all this is. Her eyes flashed. You think you're so clever, but I'll get the board involved. I'll call a special meeting if I have to. We'll review your residency. We'll look into how you bought this house, into your finances. I'll make sure the whole neighborhood sees what kind of man you really are. The words struck Terrence like ice. Not because he had anything to hide, but because he knew the kind of power she wielded in the neighborhood. HOA letters, fines, nuisance complaints. It might sound petty to outsiders, but here it could ruin daily life. Simone let out a shaky breath, her voice trembling but firm. Why are you doing this? Why can't you just admit you're wrong? Lorraine turned on her with a sneer. Because I'm not wrong. You'll see. Everyone will see. The younger officer finally raised his voice. Ma'am, that's enough. You've been given a warning. If you continue making false claims, you could face consequences. I suggest you go back inside before this escalates further. For the first time that night, Lorraine hesitated. Her bravado cracked slightly under the weight of authority, but she wasn't ready to give up. She pressed her hand against her chest, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. I'm just trying to protect this neighborhood. If none of you appreciate that, then maybe you don't deserve it. Terrence shook his head, his voice low but carrying across the street. Protecting people doesn't mean terrorizing them. It doesn't mean humiliating them in front of their children. What you did tonight wasn't about safety. It was about control. The murmurs from the remaining neighbors grew louder, sharper. "He's right," someone whispered. "She's gone too far." Another muttered, "This is the last straw." Lorraine heard them and her face drained of color. For years she had wielded her HOA position like a sword, sending notices, dictating lawn heights, enforcing trash schedules. But tonight, in front of everyone, her authority was slipping. Simone's voice cut through again, soft but piercing. "You can't take back what you did tonight. You showed everyone who you really are." Lorraine's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, silence settled over her. The street no longer looked at Terrence like a suspect. Their eyes were fixed on her. The younger officer folded the registration papers and handed them back to Terrence. "Sir, you're free to go inside. You've been cooperative. Thank you for your patience." Terrence took them, his hands steady now. "Thank you, officers." Then turning to Lorraine, his voice was final. "And as for you, you'll have to live with what you did. I hope you think about the damage you caused tonight, not just to me but to my daughter." Lorraine stood frozen, caught in the spotlight of her own making, neighbors' stares heavy on her back. But even though the police were leaving, the fallout of this night was only just beginning, and the walls of the community itself were about to crack. The patrol cars finally rolled away, their red and blue lights fading into the distance. For the first time all evening, the cul-de-sac was quiet. No shouting, no sirens, just the faint hum of crickets in the distance. But the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like the air after a storm when you know more rain is coming. Terrence placed a hand on Simone's shoulder. "Come on, baby girl. Let's go inside." She followed him reluctantly, her phone still in her hand, camera app still open as if she didn't quite trust the night was over. He gently pushed the garage button, and the door rumbled shut, closing them off from the stares of neighbors who were still watching from behind curtains. Inside, the house felt different. The familiar living room with its warm yellow lamplight no longer offered comfort. Simone sank into the couch, hugging her knees, her phone resting beside her. She hadn't cried earlier, not in front of Lorraine, not in front of the police, but now her eyes burned, wet and unblinking. Terrence sat down across from her, his hands clasped together, his knuckles white. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was thick with the weight of what had just happened. Finally, Simone broke it. "Dad, I thought they were going to hurt you." Her voice cracked and tears slipped down her cheeks. "They were pointing at you like you were a criminal." Terrence swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to tell her it had never been that serious, that she was safe, that everything was fine now. But he couldn't. He refused to lie to her. "I was scared too," he admitted. "More than I can explain. But I had to stay calm because you were watching. I needed you to see that panic doesn't solve anything, even when it's unfair." Simone wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "Why does she hate us so much? Why would she make something up like that?" Terrence leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if the answer might be written there. Sometimes people can't stand being wrong. And sometimes they can't stand the thought of someone else having what they don't think you deserve. Tonight wasn't about the car. It was about control. Lorraine wanted to prove she had the power to say who belongs and who doesn't. Simone frowned, her lips trembling. "That's so stupid. You've lived here forever. You worked hard for this house, for everything. Why would anyone think you don't belong?" Her words hit him harder than he expected. He looked at her, really looked at her. The teenager who had grown up under this roof, who had eaten breakfast at this table, who had waited at the bus stop in front of this driveway. Everything he had done, every late night, every sacrifice had been for her. He leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "You're right. It doesn't make sense. But people like Lorraine don't care about sense. They care about control, and when they lose it, they lash out. Tonight was her lashing out, and we got caught in the middle." Simone hugged her knees tighter, whispering, "I wish I hadn't seen it. I wish I could forget." Terrence's chest ached at her words. He moved to sit beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I wish I could erase it for you, too. But since I can't, all I can do is remind you of this. You saw the truth tonight. You saw how important it is to stand your ground, even when someone's trying to tear you down. You didn't run, Simone. You recorded, you spoke up. That's bravery." She sniffled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I didn't feel brave. I felt small." He kissed the top of her head, his voice steady. "Courage doesn't mean you don't feel scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared. And that's exactly what you did. For the first time since they'd come inside, Simone's breathing steadied. She closed her eyes, letting herself lean into the comfort of his arm. Terrence glanced toward the front window, the blinds still half open. He could see shadows moving across the street, neighbors still whispering, still dissecting the night's events. He knew tomorrow would bring more stares, more gossip, maybe even a meeting or two called by Lorraine to spin her side of the story. But right now, in this living room, none of that mattered. What mattered was the girl at his side, and the lesson she would carry long after this night was over. He whispered almost to himself, "They tried to humiliate us, but we're still here, together, and no one can take that from us." But while the night gave them a fragile moment of peace, the next day would show just how deep the cracks in the community had grown, and how far Lorraine would go to protect her pride.